The second thing that you spoke about in your article, though, was about feedback. So again, I guess it's similar to what you were just talking about in terms of accessibility, in terms of making sure that feedback is clear, not just at the end point of the module, but all the way through. Am I understanding your argument correctly?
Yeah, so one of the key things that I kind of pioneer in terms of my teaching is to make sure that feedback is standardized across modules, standardized across assignments, and is as accessible as possible. So it both gives that positivity and that reinforcement, but it also gives very clear direction in terms of how to push on and do better in the future. So just a little bit of a point on that. When I was at university, one of the most frustrating things for me was to see different assignments marked differently. Obviously, you have different rubrics which shows you how to mark that work, but the feedback was presented differently. And in some cases, and I think we've all done it at one point, but hopefully snapped out of it, is to highlight maybe a phrase or something that we don't fully understand and just comment a question mark, which in our minds might be saying to a student, I don't know what this means. But actually, what a student needs to progress is for you to say, I'm not entirely sure what you was trying to get at here. Is it this? If so, have you tried presenting it in this way? And obviously that takes a lot more work. And there's scholars such as Dr. Andy Grayson, who's done a lot of work in terms of feedback mechanisms and how to speed that up for an academic, but also give that individualization, which we'll check out and talk about in a different podcast. But for me, it's about also how you can think about providing that feedback throughout the module. So it might not just be assessment on work. It might be feedback such as, I'm not getting this particular topic. I know you've tried to talk about it a couple of times, but it's still not clicking with me. Can we talk about it in a little bit more detail? It could be feedback for you as an academic, such as, this concept that you're talking about, it's not fully accessible to me either. Is there a way in which we can talk about it in different terminology, something perhaps more updated? But what we notice is that one of the reasons why individuals might possibly be doing worse in terms of their degree and acting to increase this awarding gap is that they might not feel that they're able to seek this help. They might not feel that they can provide this feedback. And so one thing that I actively do is keep what's called a Padlet. So it's a piece of online software which allows you to anonymously post on a discussion board, and then people can either comment on it or you can lock those posts. And what that allows me to do is, as I'm teaching, but also preparing for a session, is to have a look at that feedback. And if a student perhaps has a question about the content as I'm talking, but they don't feel they can put their hand up. And this also maps onto perhaps students that have higher levels of anxiety or don't want to feel embarrassed in front of their peers. Students who are at their first year of university, perhaps. I can see that a question has come through and I can either answer it directly, so I can stop the session and address it. Or one thing that I really like to do, and I've had really positive feedback from students in the past who have kind of self-disclosed afterwards, is I've been able to keep the lecture going and then almost seamlessly start to talk about that comment or question in my delivery. And what that kind of does is it gives that safeguard for that student who, if in case someone is just something as simple as other students might see them on their phone texting in a question or asking on the online discussion group, and then if I stop the session straight away, it almost says that student not only has a question so they don't understand, but also that student is anxious, so doesn't want to ask the question. So I've been quite commendated on the fact that I can seamlessly bring these questions or comments into my delivery and just keep the lecture going. And I think that for me is something that's really beneficial, and it really does help students know that they are feeling supported and can ask questions at any time, which hopefully helps us to close that gap.
Yeah, I think it's about getting that balance right, isn't it, between formative and summative feedback. So summative is where you have feedback after something that's assessed. So something that's going to be credit weighting or credit bearing, that's going to actively feed into a grade, whereas formative feedback is more informal. It happens during the module. So I do that a lot, actually, in terms of thinking through how do I test my students without it looking like a test, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
sure.
things like class discussions, class debates, getting them to do mini presentations to the rest of the group, getting them to ask questions of each other, because usually if there's a question that someone has, it's often easier to ask someone else what they think than it is to ask the person at the front of the class.